Hello chess fans, today we will be continuing our series on the Caro Kann defense. However, we will not be talking about any major variations because we have already discussed that in previous videos. However, I still wanted to make this episode because I want to basically fill in the blanks. So we already discussed all the major variations that exist, and I want to discuss some minor ones for a brief moment. And also, I got some criticism from one of my students that I didn't talk about the Botvinnik-Karls variation in depth. He told me that I discussed, let me show you what I mean. So here, after e5 in the advanced variation, there are two moves. There's bishop to f5, and there's also c5. And he told me that I discussed the bishop f5 well, but I didn't talk about c5 a lot, even though this is the variation that he plays. So I'm gonna do that part again. We're gonna discuss the Botvinnik-Karls variation a bit more in depth. Okay, so c5, and here, as I said, there's only one critical line. The best line here is to take for white. It's d takes c5. However, this is unnatural for most beginners. Most beginners play c3 or knight f3. But if you are an advanced player, you know with the white pieces that here you need to take. I will discuss the main line, which is taking first, and then I will discuss all the other possible, not all of them, but like other possible continuations, other possible structures. Let's start with this one. So d takes c5, and after d takes c5, we play this move e6. This is the downside of the Botvinnik-Karls variation. We play e6 without getting the bishop out to f5. So that's why this variation is not really considered the main line, because the bishop doesn't get out. However, it is playable, and it is definitely decent as well. Okay, so when we get to this position, there are already a couple of continuations. The main continuation played by masters is this move a3. However, the most played continuation in the Lichess database, so this is what most people play, it's bishop to e3. I will discuss a3 first. After a3, we take the pawn, so white gives our pawn back. Knight to f3, knight e7, b4, bishop to b6, bishop b2, a5. We can play something like, we can even play a6 here instead. And then after a move like b4, we drop the bishop back to a7. I think this is the line that I showed in my other video. However, they're both playable. You can play knight e7 or a6 here. So knight e7, for example, let's say b4, bishop to b6, dropping the bishop back, bishop b2, a5, challenging the pawns, castles. And here we basically get to this position. Takes on a1. Let me show you one idea before I move on. So here we have to defend against bishop h7. So white is threatening to take on h7. This is called a Greek gift sacrifice, and then knight g5, queen h5. If you want to know about this idea, you should type this in YouTube. It's called Greek gift sacrifice in chess. You will find many videos on this topic. I'm not gonna get into this right now. That's why we play knight g6. So we stop bishop takes h7. White tries to re-enable it by playing h4, h5, and here we basically have to make some exchanges here, so the queen is deflected off of the d1 square, and then we can play knight to f4. Now the bishop can take as well. However, that is totally fine. That is not an issue. And yeah, we play knight f4. The bishop should drop back to f1. This is a very unnatural move, and this is actually the only move that keeps very slight advantage for white. This bishop f1. Every other move equalizes, or black is better in some lines. So this, I think, is a very potent line. So this is the main line, but this is not what you're going to see most often. What you're going to see is this move, instead of a3, bishop to e3. So why do people like this move? Well, it's because this bishop on e3 defends c5, and now you can continue by playing knight d7, which attacks both pawns. Bishop to b5 is the most played move, pinning the knight. And here we play knight e7, knight f3, knight c6. So I showed this line in my other video. And here we are going to win one of the pawns back. So white stubbornly tries to keep the pawn, let's say, by taking the knight on c6. However, this is very bad, and after b4, this is very bad because we can play a5, pawn to c3, defending the pawn again, and we play bishop to a6. And now this is our compensation for the lost pawn. This bishop on a6 is cutting off this entire diagonal, and it's not allowing white to castle the king. So white's king remains in the center, which means the rook cannot really get developed easily. You know, rook has to come out this way, maybe h4, rook h3, rook g3, or something like this. However, this takes a lot of time. And there's one more tactical motif here that you should know. Let me remove the arrows. Let's say after knight bd2, there's one very special tactical motif, and it is after a takes b4, c takes b4, this idea queen b8, which attacks b4, and it also double attacks the pawn on e5. So this is just a fork. Just so you guys know, this is a fork. Black is winning the pawn back, and black has very, very active play. So this is much better for the black pieces. Okay, so that is another line that I wanted to show you, and some ideas of how white can go wrong. Now let's go back briefly and talk about, so not bishop to f5, no, c5, sorry, my Lichess study is lagging again. I don't know why this happens. There we go, it fixed. So c5 again, and now white plays c3 in this position. This is the most played move, so at lower levels you are going to see this move quite often. This is the most played move in the Lichess database, not the Masters database. So pawn to c3, we continue developing with knight to c6, and keep in mind this pawn cannot be taken right now because e5 would be hanging. However, knight f3 enables taking this pawn. So we should not develop the bishop to g4 right away here. Keep this in mind. We should not develop the bishop to g4 right away. We should take on d4 first. So we take on d4, and now we go bishop to g4. Okay? And the reason why we go to g4 and not to f5 is very clear in this case. We want to trade the bishop for the knight. We want to take the knight on f3 because this knight on f3 guards d4, and we want to put a lot of pressure on d4. You're going to see in a couple of moves, let's say bishop e2, e6, castles, knight to e7, knight c3, knight to f5. As you can see, every single one of black's piece is aiming towards d4. Even this bishop is threatening the defender of d4, which is the knight on f3. So this bishop is attacking the defender of d4. These two knights are attacking the pawn on d4 directly, and queen b6 is going to come very soon, also attacking d4. So let's say bishop to e3 is played. Here you can already play queen b6. You can also continue by playing bishop e7. This is also okay, just developing and trying to castle. h3, as we said, we take, white takes, queen to b6, and here only move is knight to a4. This is the only good move in my opinion, and after a move like queen a5, pawn to a3 is the most played response here. We take on e3 and we go bishop to g5. So this is how we justify our bishop e7 move, is we take on e3, damaging white's pawns, and then this bishop goes to this diagonal, attacking this pawn. So from here on out, we will castle the king, and we will basically go and play on the c file. So we'll play rook c8, maybe even double up on the c file, most likely, and this is how the game will continue. So I think this is a very interesting line. There's one more move that I want to discuss, one more idea. So instead of knight f3, what if white tries to overwhelm us by playing pawn to f4? Now pawn to f4 might look scary, however it's really not. And here we should take the pawn on d4. The reason why we should take the pawn is because now white again is threatening to take on c5, because here we don't have enough time to recapture one of the pawns, because now the e5 pawn is guarded by the f4 pawn, so we will never be able to take that. So we take, white takes back, and here we continue with this idea, knight to h6. Now knight h6 is not the best move, however I want you to understand this move as a concept. Knight h6 is possible because white played f4, and that is possible because the bishop doesn't see the h6 square anymore. And as you know, in Caro Kann, in these sorts of lines, we want to get the bishop out, we want to play e6, and then we want to develop knight e7 and knight f5. However, in this case, there is no need to do that. We can develop right to h6 because there's no more possibilities of bishop takes h6, and then we would have a damaged structure. The best move here is actually h5, which you have to know if you're in this position. However, knight h6 is also one of the top moves, and I think from a conceptual standpoint, if you understand this, I think you will understand the position very well. So let's say knight to f3, we go bishop to g4, and you're gonna see all the ideas here are very similar. Bishop b5, let's say, e6, castles the king, knight to f5, all the pieces are attacking d4. Knight c3, queen b6, white has to take at this point, so white takes, b takes, we keep the pawn on c6 and the queen on b6, and after knight e2 we have a slightly better position. Our pieces are slightly better placed than white's pieces. A very tiny bit though. This is not like a huge advantage or anything like that, however it is better. Let me actually check with the computer. Yeah, computer tells me this is minus 0.6 if we play h5. So this is a very good position. Okay, so that is what I wanted to talk about when it comes to Botwin and Karl's variation. There's not a whole lot more to discuss. You just have to know the critical line, which is d takes c5, and you also know what you have to do if white plays something else like c3, and how to challenge this structure by developing the knight to c6, capturing the pawn, and then attacking d4 with every single one of your pieces. So let me illustrate that one more time. In this line, we develop like this. Every piece attacks d4, directly or indirectly. Bishop on g4 attacks the defender of d4, the two knights attack the pawn on d4, the queen will come to b6, it will attack b2 and d4 at the same time. So this is what you want to do as the black pieces. Okay, I think that covers the Botwin and Karl's variation. And now I want to mention a couple of details on some other lines, two lines specifically, and those are the hillbilly attack and the Breyer variation. So let's start with the hillbilly attack. So after e4, c6, bishop to c4, we play this d5 move. Sorry, I kept the arrows because I was making a thumbnail for this. So after d5, ed5, cd5, white plays, let's say, bishop to b3. This position is going to transpose into the exchange Caro Kann once white plays d4. If white doesn't play d4, then you will continue developing knight c6, knight f6, e5, you take the whole center, you have an advantage for sure. However, if white plays d4 and transposes the position into exchange Caro Kann structure, now you're basically playing exchange Caro Kann, but you're up a tempo. And the reason why you're up a tempo is because this bishop was placed on c4, and after d5 takes, the bishop has to move again. So if you want to learn how to refute the hillbilly attack, learn the exchange Caro Kann, okay? I can show you some lines here. They're very similar to the exchange Caro Kann: d4, bishop f5, e6, bishop d6, and knight e7. So we get the same structure as the exchange, or same piece placement as the exchange Caro Kann. Maybe the bishop is on f5 instead of g4. Okay, it doesn't matter that much in this case. But we have similar piece placements and we have similar ideas, but we are up a tempo because white played this bishop to c4 and then bishop to b3. Okay, so if you want to learn how to refute the hillbilly, you need to learn the exchange Caro Kann. If you master the exchange Caro Kann, a hillbilly is going to be a walk in the park. Okay, I don't want to talk more about that because I don't think it's really that necessary anymore. There are not a lot of theoretical lines in the hillbilly. There's just one more line I want to discuss that's called the Breyer variation, which is quite unique. Well, it's different. So as you know, after so d3, so remember, if knight to f3 is played in this position, d5, d3, this is the endgame offer variation. We already talked about this. However, white has a very interesting move order here. After d3 immediately, d5, white can play this move knight d2. And this is the, actually this right here is already the start of the Breyer variation. But okay, knight d2 is, let me check if it's, yeah, it's the main move here. Knight d2 is the main move. And here we can continue playing in a very interesting way. So first and foremost, we can take the whole center with e5. This is the main move. And after knight to f3, bishop to d6, what white will play is this move d4. So this is the whole idea. And I've faced this myself with the black pieces, and I actually lost that game, if I remember correctly, because people that play this line are going to be very well prepared, and you have to be very careful. You have to take on d4, and after it takes on d5, you go knight to f6. Let's say takes on c6, knight c6, bishop e2, castles, knight to b3. You have to be very careful to not lose the pawn on d4, because now everything is attacking it. However, you can go bishop to b4 check and queen b6, and you are doing fine here. But you have to know all of this, or you have to figure it out, which takes a lot of time. However, similar to every other variation, almost every other variation in the Caro Kann, we can avoid any theoretical continuations by playing g6 instead of e5 and just going into this system, which is what I would recommend, by the way. I would not recommend you to play e5 because people are going to be prepared. If they play this line, they're mostly expecting e5. So after g6, knight to f3, we go bishop g7, and now we can play e5. But now it's a totally different story because the bishop on g7 is also supporting a d4, right? So the d4 pawn push becomes a lot more difficult. And after castles, knight to e7, c3, castles. Here you continue developing, and you have a very normal position here. I would say I prefer black's position slightly. However, it is playable from both sides. Both sides have interesting ideas. Okay, so that's going to be it for today. That's going to be actually it for the whole Caro Kann series for a long time, in my opinion. I hope you enjoyed this series. I plan to do more series on other openings. The next one I'm planning to do is probably going to be the Nimzo Indian defense, so stay tuned for that. And yeah, if you enjoyed the video, like and subscribe, help the channel grow, and I will see you in the next one. Have a great day.